HOA president tried evicting me from my home. Too bad I own every brick and beam. Have you ever faced a relentless bully, convinced of their absolute power, only to discover a forgotten truth that flips the script entirely, turning their baseless threats into a public spectacle of their own undoing? My name is Maya Sharma, and my home, nestled on a quiet, tree-lined street in what was once a charming, eclectic neighborhood known as Willow Creek, was my sanctuary. It was an old house, a bit quirky, with a sprawling, vibrant garden that spilled over its edges, a deliberate embrace of natural chaos against the manicured conformity of modern suburban life. I inherited it from my grandmother, who had lived there for 60 years, a bastion of independent spirit and wild roses. Then came Victoria Thorne. She was the freshly elected president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, a woman whose every perfectly coiffed blonde hair and impeccably tailored suit screamed control. She was obsessed with aesthetics, property values, and, most infuriatingly, uniformity. Victoria deemed my grandmother's beloved house, with its vibrant, untamed garden and charmingly faded paint, an eyesore, a blight on the neighborhood's rising prestige, and, most audaciously, a non-compliant structure that needed to be either drastically renovated to her exact specifications or, as she so blithely suggested, removed. She wanted me out to replace my quirky, historic home with another cookie-cutter mansion, an embodiment of her vision for Willow Creek. Ms. Sharma, she'd purred, her lips barely moving as she surveyed my home from the pristine asphalt of the street, her expression a mix of distaste and self-satisfaction during an uninvited inspection. Your property, while quaint, simply does not align with the elevated aesthetic and architectural standards of Willow Creek Estates. Your paint is faded, your garden is overgrown, and your very home exudes an air of disrepair. We are attracting a higher caliber of resident now, Ms. Sharma, and unfortunately your residence detracts from our collective property value. We have voted to require immediate, extensive renovations to bring your property into compliance, or we will be forced to pursue further action up to and including removal for community betterment. Her dismissive wave of a perfectly manicured hand underscored her absolute authority, her eyes sweeping over my cherished home as if it were nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle she was preparing to eradicate. Her arrogance was breathtaking, her sense of entitlement boundless, as if my very existence was a personal insult to her grand, exclusive vision. I tried to reason with her, patiently explaining that my home was historically significant, protected by local preservation guidelines, and that my garden was a certified pollinator habitat vital for the local ecosystem. I presented her with documents from the city's Historic Preservation Society and scientific endorsements for my garden's biodiversity. I even offered to repaint the house in a period-appropriate color and trim the hedges by a foot, a compromise that went against my purest principles but seemed a reasonable concession for peace. Mrs. Thorne, I calmly explained, my voice strained with suppressed frustration, holding up official city paperwork, this house is over 100 years old, it's a protected historical landmark. My garden is recognized by the State Botanical Society. It's vital for the local ecosystem, and both are in compliance with all city ordinances. I'm happy to make some aesthetic adjustments, but you cannot demand I tear down or radically alter a landmark. Your HOA bylaws cannot supersede city and state preservation laws. She merely scoffed, pushing my proposals away as if they carried a contagion. Historical significance, Ms. Sharma, is a charming hobby, but modern property values demand uniformity. Our bylaws are designed to protect those values. The board has voted. You have 1 month to submit plans for a complete overhaul that meets our aesthetic guidelines. Failure to comply will result in substantial fines and a forced demolition for community blight. Her icy resolve was chilling, a thinly veiled threat of unknown repercussions and a clear indication that compromise was not in her vocabulary, only absolute obedience. The threats escalated from legal notices for non-compliance to the shocking arrival of an eviction notice claiming my home was now condemned by the HOA and slated for demolition. One sweltering afternoon, I returned from a city council meeting, exhausted from fighting, to find a crew of private demolition workers on my property tearing down my beloved grandmother's antique garden shed. They had already demolished the small, charming stone wall that bordered my property and were now eyeing the main house, heavy machinery idling ominously nearby. A crudely spray-painted sign on my front door read, HOA order, property condemned. Prepare for demolition. Victoria. There was no doubt. She had physically invaded my space, destroyed my property, and attempted to seize my home. Rage, cold and precise, unlike anything I had ever felt, ignited and settled deep within me. As I stood there, reeling from the sight of the senseless destruction of my garden shed, which held decades of my grandmother's precious gardening tools and memories, a faint red light blinked on my hidden outdoor security camera. It was a discreet, high-definition camera I had installed months ago to monitor wildlife activity in my garden, completely forgotten in the chaos. My heart hammered with grim realization. It would have captured everything. Every single damning second of the demolition crew's illegal entry, Victoria's self-satisfied smirk as she directed them, and the horrifying destruction of my property. This wasn't just about my home or my garden shed. It was about something far larger, something truly vital to the fabric of our community. Unknown to Victoria, my quirky, historic house was not just a personal residence. It served as the unofficial, beloved community art and history hub for Willow Creek. My grandmother had established a free weekly art class for local children in her sunroom, a tradition I continued. The small, unassuming shed she just demolished was where we stored decades of local historical archives' old photographs, town meeting minutes, personal letters from Willow Creek's founders that formed the basis of our annual Founders' Day celebration and historical walking tours. Victoria's act of vandalism didn't just destroy my property. It jeopardized a vital community program for children, destroyed irreplaceable historical records, and threatened to erase the very identity of Willow Creek, affecting hundreds of families and generations of local heritage. This wasn't just petty spite. It was an act of profound cultural and social recklessness. A new audacious idea born from cold fury and a wicked spark of defiant justice began to form. Victoria wanted to erase my history? Fine. I would give her a history lesson she'd never forget. Armed with the undeniable video evidence of the demolition crew's illegal trespass and destruction and a freshly printed, deeply shocking document from the city archives, I prepared for the HOA's annual general meeting. Victoria, radiating her usual imperious calm, was midway through a self-congratulatory speech about the progress and modernization of Willow Creek Estates, prominently featuring glossy renderings of a new community wellness center, where my house currently stood. And I trust all residents are now enjoying the elevated visual appeal and pristine order of our community, she purred, her eyes sweeping the room, stopping briefly on me with a smug, knowing smirk, confident in her imminent triumph. Actually, Mrs. Thorne, I said, my voice cutting through her monologue, calm but firm. Some of us are not enjoying it at all. In fact, some of us have had our private property illegally invaded and destroyed, and our community's history threatened. I then held up my tablet, projecting the crystal-clear security footage onto the large screen behind her. The video showed the demolition crew tearing down my shed and wall, with Victoria herself clearly visible, directing them, her face a mask of triumphant glee. The timestamp was undeniable, the act irrefutable. A collective gasp rippled through the room as the residents watched, horrified. Victoria, initially frozen in disbelief, her triumphant smirk dissolving into a look of abject horror, quickly snapped into her default mode of aggressive denial. That's outrageous. A fabrication. That's not what happened. Your shed was a hazard. We were merely performing a necessary safety remediation. You're trying to slander me, Ms. Sharma, with doctored footage. And your house is clearly non-compliant. We are simply acting to protect property values. She shrieked, her face turning crimson with rage and fear. She started to storm towards the projection as if she could physically rip the image away, but stopped herself, trembling. Actually, Mrs. Thorne, that shed, like every single brick and beam of my house, has been on land never part of Willow Creek Estates, and its destruction constitutes a direct attack on a protected historical site. The calm, authoritative voice belonged to Mr. Arthur Hayes, the city's chief archivist and a renowned local historian who stepped out from the back of the room. He was accompanied by a stern-faced representative from the county sheriff's department. I had contacted Mr. Hayes immediately after the demolition, and he, recognizing the profound historical implications, had contacted both the authorities and the local press. Furthermore, Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Hayes continued, looking pointedly at Victoria, my office, after Ms. Sharma brought this to our attention, has thoroughly reviewed the original land grants and subdivision maps for Willow Creek. It has come to light that Ms. Sharma's property, including the house and the land it sits on, was never officially incorporated into the Willow Creek Estates HOA. It remained due to an ancient, unrecorded clerical error in the original subdivision filings from 40 years ago, a completely separate, independent parcel. Ms. Sharma is not and has never been an HOA member. Therefore, none of your bylaws, demands, or demolition orders have any legal standing over her property whatsoever. A collective gasp, louder than before, reverberated through the room, followed by stunned silence. Eleanor Vance, the tenacious investigative reporter from the city's largest newspaper who had been tipped off by Mr. Hayes about the HOA fraud and historical scandal, emerged from her car, camera rolling, her lights blazing, illuminating the entire scene. The pressure on Victoria intensified. Her bravado completely evaporated. Her face, a mask of pure terror, crumpled. Her eyes darted wildly, seeking an escape that wasn't there, her gaze finally landing on the news camera, then the still-blinking light of my doorbell camera. She stammered, denying everything, her voice a reedy whisper of her former imperiousness. No, I didn't know the error, it's a misunderstanding. The house is still an eyesore. He's crazy. That shed was falling apart anyway. She wailed, utterly nonsensical, her words twisting into a pathetic whine, but her desperate fear was palpable. She looked utterly terrified, her perfect facade cracking and crumbling before our eyes, revealing a raw, ugly desperation, the naked soul of a petty tyrant in over her head. The county sheriff, who had arrived moments later with his deputies, calmly stepped forward. Mrs. Thorne, due to your intentional and illegal destruction of private property, attempted coercion, abuse of power, and the clear intent to defraud Ms. Sharma of her property, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, he gestured to his deputies who now moved to flank a trembling, wailing Victoria, her pathetic cries dissolving into choked sobs as the handcuffs clicked into place. The fallout was swift and brutal. Victoria Thorne was arrested on the spot. Her humiliated figure a stark contrast to her usual imperious demeanor, her wails echoing eerily across the now shocked community center. The news of her arrest, the irrefutable video evidence of her illegal demolition, the exposé of her malicious scheme, and the shocking revelation that my property was never even part of the HOA exploded in national media, painting her as a cautionary tale of unchecked power and malicious greed. The Willow Creek Estates HOA facing immense public outrage, a full-blown investigation by city authorities into financial mismanagement and abuse of power, and the threat of civil lawsuits from residents impacted by her tyrannical reign, including those who had been forced into unnecessary renovations by her, immediately stripped her of her presidency and publicly disavowed all her actions. Her carefully cultivated social circle crumbled, her allies vanished, and her name became synonymous with cruelty, corruption, and a chilling disregard for history and community. She lost everything she had so desperately sought to control and impress: her prestige, her wealth, her reputation, her ambition, and hubris repaid in full by public humiliation, profound legal ruin, and a devastating fall from grace. As for me, my house stood, battered but unbowed, a true bastion of independence. The community, horrified by Victoria's actions, rallied around me, offering help to rebuild my shed and restore my garden. The art classes for children resumed, now with a renewed sense of purpose, and the historical archives were safely relocated and digitized. There was a grim satisfaction in seeing justice served, in knowing that her petty tyranny had finally met its dramatic end. But the cost was immense, a deep scar left by the invasion of my sanctuary. It leaves us to ponder: when does the pursuit of perceived community perfection become a dangerous, destructive obsession that tramples individual rights, harms history, and exposes deep-seated corruption? How far should individuals go to protect their homes and their heritage from the unchecked aggression of others? And what is our collective responsibility to challenge those who wield power for personal gain, even when it means uncovering long-buried truths that shake the very foundation of a community?